Hi guys, tonight we'll explore one of the most mysterious legends of the American Southwest, the Hopi story of the Ant People. These ancient beings were said to have lived deep underground and played a vital role in the survival of the Hopi during times of catastrophe. What if these stories are more than myth? Could there really have been encounters with hidden civilizations beneath the desert sands? If you appreciate calm, reflective journeys through forgotten times, don't forget to tap like, subscribe, and share in the comments where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing where these stories are reaching, and tell me, what hidden story should we uncover together next? The Hopi people, one of the oldest living cultures in North America, carry oral traditions that reach back thousands of years. Among their stories is the tale of two great world-ending disasters, the end of the First World and the end of the Second World, each time leaving humanity on the brink of extinction. According to the Hopi elders, when destruction came, it was the ant people who sheltered them in their vast underground chambers, teaching them how to survive until it was safe to return to the surface. This is not a story of conquest or conflict, but of quiet survival, deep wisdom, and mysterious helpers whose very appearance was unlike anything on the surface. The name Ant People itself comes from the striking similarity. Long limbs, rounded heads, and the way they carried their food and resources underground, just like ants in a colony. For the Hopi, this was not imagination, but memory. A memory of descent into the earth guided by beings who seemed both strange and compassionate. As we imagine the high mesas and desert plateaus of Arizona, it's worth picturing how isolated the Hopi once were, their villages clinging to cliff sides, the red dust stretching endlessly in all directions. In such a landscape, stories are not only entertainment, they are survival manuals carrying wisdom through generations. The Ant People legend was not meant as a fantasy, but as an explanation of how their ancestors endured cataclysms when the world above was unsafe. Imagine the ground trembling with firestorms, or skies darkened with ash, or floods rising faster than anyone could run. To survive, they needed guidance, and the Ant People were the ones who opened the hidden doors of the earth. Some traditions describe the descent as travelling through a sipapu, a symbolic passageway, often represented by a small hole in the floor of kivas, the circular underground ceremonial chambers the Hopi still use today. This sipapu was seen as a reminder of the passage between worlds, from destruction to renewal, from surface to underworld, and back again. The Ant People were described as small in stature compared to humans, with strong features, large eyes that glowed softly in the dark, and skin that seemed adapted to life beneath the earth. They were said to possess advanced knowledge, not in the sense of machines or weapons, but in their ability to cultivate food, store water, and protect life in times of scarcity. For the Hopi, this made them not monsters or enemies, but allies, even saviors. When we look at ancient petroglyphs carved into stone near Hopi lands, some researchers believe we can see figures with large round heads, antenna-like shapes, and elongated bodies. Could these be artistic echoes of the Ant People? Archaeologists prefer to see them as symbolic, perhaps connected to fertility, stars, or cycles of time. Yet for those who listen closely to the Hopi elders, these carvings are reminders of something their ancestors truly encountered. The legend also ties to the Hopi calendar of worlds. They believe humanity is living in the fourth world now. Each previous world ended in catastrophe, and in each transition, the Ant People played a role in helping survivors endure. The first destruction came through fire, the second through ice, the third through floods. In every age, it was the underground refuge that preserved life. This concept of cyclical worlds makes the Hopi worldview unique, linking human fate to cosmic patterns and the need for resilience. To drift deeper into the story, imagine the cool silence of subterranean corridors where the Hopi ancestors waited out storms above. There, under flickering torchlight, they would have learned patience, resourcefulness, and humility. When they finally returned to the surface, they carried not only survival but wisdom. That cooperation, gratitude, and balance with the natural world were the true lessons of the Ant People. In the quiet desert nights, the Hopi elders would sit with younger generations, retelling the stories of the ant people as if they had happened only yesterday. The children would listen closely, eyes wide, as the elders described the descent into the earth during the world's great disasters. These were not stories to frighten them, but to remind them of the resilience their people carried and the gratitude owed to the mysterious beings who once offered protection. The ant people were described not just as helpers, but as teachers who showed the Hopi how to cultivate crops in hidden chambers, using methods that did not rely on sunlight alone. Some accounts speak of glowing stones or luminous plants that gave light underground, allowing seeds to sprout even in total darkness. In these underground refuges, the ant people were said to have stored vast supplies of grain, roots, and edible herbs, carefully rationed to sustain both their own kind and the humans they sheltered. Survival depended not on abundance but on discipline, and so the Hopi learned from their hosts the value of humility and restraint. Those who were wasteful could not endure, while those who honoured the rhythm of life and took only what was needed found strength to continue. The image of the ant people, small yet powerful in their wisdom, became a symbol for the Hopi. It was not size or dominance that mattered, but cooperation and harmony with the world. Stories describe the ant people's dwellings as honeycomb-like, with chambers carved into the rock, connected by tunnels that stretched far beneath the mesas. Some say these tunnels reached across vast distances, perhaps linking to other hidden cities deep within the earth. As the Hopi listened, they understood that these places were not to be sought recklessly. They were sacred, revealed only in times of dire need, and guarded with the trust of those who had shown mercy before. The legend carried another subtle warning. If humanity once again turned away from balance, bringing destruction to the earth, the time might come when the ant people would be called upon once more. To those who truly believed, the ant people were not gone. They had simply retreated, waiting in the depths, watching to see if humanity would remember the lessons of gratitude and respect. When travellers and scholars later asked Hopi elders about these tales, they were often met with silence or a gentle change of subject. Not all knowledge, the elders believed, should be shared lightly. The world outside might dismiss such beings as myths, but to the Hopi, these were truths of their past, held carefully so that the memory would never vanish. Beneath the surface of their ceremonies and dances lay this deeper current of remembrance, woven into the rhythms of songs, the symbols painted on pottery, and the stories told around fires. The ant people were not just figures in legend, they were keepers of continuity, ensuring that no matter how many worlds ended, the Hopi spirit would endure. When we think about the desert landscape of the Hopi homeland, it seems almost impossible that life could have continued during times of cataclysm without some form of refuge. The mesas rise like ancient fortresses, their tops holding villages that have been occupied for centuries, perhaps millennia. Yet the ground beneath those mesas carries its own secrets. The ant people, as the stories describe, welcomed the Hopi into elaborate subterranean dwellings carved into stone, where air flowed smoothly through hidden shafts and food could be preserved against time. The elders would explain that down there, no wind could scatter seeds, no sun could scorch the fields, and no fire from the sky could burn the earth. Instead, the Hopi learned to live in stillness, adapting to the pace of the ant people, who worked tirelessly, storing food, caring for their young, and never wasting energy. For children listening to these tales, the lesson was clear. Survival is not about speed or strength, but about careful preparation and quiet endurance. One of the most fascinating parts of the Hopi account is the way it links to cycles of worlds. They say the first world was destroyed by fire, possibly recalling ancient volcanic eruptions or cosmic impacts. The second world ended in ice, perhaps echoing distant memories of glacial ages. The third world was lost to floods, bringing to mind ancient deluges remembered by cultures across the globe. Through each disaster, the ant people offered sanctuary until the fourth world, the one we live in now, could begin. The symbolism is rich. Fire, ice, and water are forces beyond human control, yet each time humanity endured with help from those beneath the earth. When returning to the surface, the Hopi did not claim mastery, but rather humility, knowing that their survival was owed to others. Even today, the Sipapu in the floor of Hopi kivas represents this passage, a reminder that emergence from the underworld is part of their identity. For outsiders, it might appear as only a small hole, but for the Hopi, it is the symbolic bridge between worlds, a reminder of gratitude to those who offered protection in the past. Some modern researchers, hearing these stories, wonder if they describe actual encounters with an ancient underground people, or if they are metaphors for resilience during real environmental catastrophes. Yet the way the Hopi preserve the details, the glowing lights underground, the careful food storage, the quiet patience of their hosts, gives the impression of lived memory rather than pure imagination. When these stories were carried forward, generation after generation, they were not told for spectacle. They were recited in calm voices, intended to remind listeners of the fragile balance of life and the importance of respect. The ant people became a symbol not only of protection, but also of wisdom that comes from humility, teaching that when humanity listens instead of dominating, survival becomes possible even in the harshest times. The Hopi tell their stories not with urgency but with calm repetition, as if the rhythm itself carries the power of memory. Among the details that surface again and again is how the ant people were not simply protectors, but patient instructors. In the safety of their underground chambers, the Hopi ancestors learned skills that would later become essential to life in the desert. They were shown how to preserve seeds, how to ration food so that nothing was wasted, and how to recognize the importance of working together. The ant people lived as a community, each individual performing a role for the good of the whole. This was perhaps the greatest lesson of all, that survival could only be achieved when each person thought beyond themselves. To the Hopi, who would later farm in one of the most arid climates in North America, this lesson echoed through centuries. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of their agriculture, were not just plants, but sacred gifts, reminders of endurance and reciprocity. Oral accounts say the ant people had ways of storing water in hidden cisterns, keeping it pure and available when the world above had none. In some versions of the tale, the ant people even shared their food stores directly, ensuring that humans would not perish. Such generosity became a symbol of compassion, teaching that strength is measured not by what one hoards, but by what one shares. The Hopi saw this as a moral duty, to remember those who once gave freely in times of desperation. Petroglyphs across the southwest sometimes depict figures with elongated bodies, large heads, and radiating lines that resemble antennae. Some researchers see these as abstract symbols of the sun or spiritual beings, but within Hopi tradition, they are often interpreted as reminders of the ant people. The carving stands silently on stone faces, weathered by centuries, yet they preserve the shapes that inspired so much curiosity. For those who believe, these are not random patterns, but artistic echoes of true encounters. Imagine the ancestors emerging once the catastrophe had passed, climbing back to the surface after long days in the earth. The first breath of open air, the sight of sunlit mesas, and the return to the sky must have carried a sense of renewal, but with it also came responsibility. The Hopi did not see their survival as chance. They saw it as a gift, accompanied by an obligation to live with humility, gratitude, and balance. To this day, the memory of the ant people is present in ceremonies, in stories, and in symbols that tie the present generation to the deep past. When outsiders first began to hear fragments of the Hopi stories, many assumed they were only symbolic tales. Yet for the Hopi, symbolism and memory are not separate. The ant people were woven into the way they explained their history, their survival, and even their relationship with the stars above. Some elders suggested that the ant people had a special connection to the heavens, that they understood the cycles of time and the movement of celestial bodies. In Hopi tradition, the stars are not just distant lights, they're relatives and guides, carrying messages that remind humanity of its place in the larger order of life. The ant people, living beneath the ground yet linked to the sky, represented a bridge between worlds. They taught the Hopi that wisdom often lies in the quiet places, hidden from plain sight. It is said that the ant people would emerge from their tunnels only when balance was in danger, offering guidance at the edge of disaster. This role was never constant, never taken for granted, but always remembered with reverence. Some versions of the tale describe how the ant people's eyes glowed softly in the darkness, allowing them to see without fire. To the Hopi, this detail was not meant to frighten but to show adaptation, that being shaped by the underworld carried gifts suited for their environment. When the Hopi lived among them, they learned to move carefully in dim light, to listen more than they spoke, and to attune themselves to silence. In that silence, patience grew, and with patience came survival. Archaeologists who study the region often remark on how advanced the Hopi agricultural practices are for such an arid environment. Dry farming, stone terraces, and knowledge of seasonal winds allowed them to grow crops where others would fail. Hopi tradition says these techniques were part of the wisdom passed down from their time with the ant people. To dismiss the story as simple myth is to overlook the possibility that memory and practicality can be one. The story of being sheltered underground during world-ending catastrophes may sound impossible, but it carries truths about preparation, cooperation, and respect for hidden knowledge. Even now, the sipapu in the ceremonial chambers is a constant reminder. Humanity has emerged before, guided by unseen hands, and must be prepared to honour that guidance again. For listeners drifting into the rhythm of the tale, the ant people become less like strangers and more like symbols of endurance, beings who embody resilience, generosity, and the mysterious ways survival wisdom can be preserved across generations. The Hopi way of storytelling is slow, deliberate, and layered. Each retelling adds something subtle, a new image or lesson that deepens the understanding of those who listen. In the accounts of the ant people, one lesson that stands out is humility. These beings, though described as different in form from humans, did not present themselves as superior rulers or gods. They were helpers, quiet and tireless, offering shelter without demanding worship. For the Hopi, this was proof that strength does not need to announce itself. True strength is shown in service, in the ability to protect others without seeking recognition. This lesson became a foundation of Hopi culture, where community life is centered not on individual pride but on the well-being of all. The ant people were remembered as meticulous workers. Their underground chambers, according to tradition, were organized like vast storerooms. Seeds were carefully preserved in clay vessels, grains were measured with precision, and water was kept pure in stone-lined pits. Every resource had its place, every action had purpose. For the Hopi, who later endured harsh summers and long winters in the desert, these examples offered a template for survival. Even in scarcity, one could thrive if order and discipline were maintained. Some elders described how the ant people communicated less through words and more through gestures, or a quiet kind of understanding. It was said that their silence taught the Hopi the value of listening to the rhythms of nature, the way the wind shifted, the way clouds built on the horizon, the way the earth itself signalled changes to come. This awareness became part of Hopi identity, shaping their ceremonies and their farming alike. To listen before acting, to watch before deciding, these were lessons first learned underground. There are petroglyphs near the Hopi mesas that some say represent these teachers. Figures with elongated bodies and unusual heads stand carved into stone, accompanied by patterns of stars or spirals. To archaeologists, these may be abstract or symbolic, but for the Hopi they are not random. They are reminders etched in rock, proof that their ancestors once walked beside beings who came from beneath the ground. Each carving is a whisper from the past, linking generations through shared memory. Emerging back to the surface after such an experience must have carried both relief and sorrow. Relief, because the dangers of catastrophe were over. Sorrow, because the protective company of the ant people was left behind. Yet the Hopi did not view this as loss. They saw it as a cycle, a passage from safety to responsibility. Above ground, they were to apply what they had learned, to live with balance, gratitude, and the knowledge that even the smallest beings can carry the greatest wisdom. Among the Hopi, the idea of emergence from one world to the next is central to their entire worldview. The ant people are tied directly to these transitions, because without them, the Hopi might never have survived to enter the fourth world. This belief creates a sense that the Hopi story is not only about the past, but also about cycles yet to come. When the elders speak of fire, ice and floods, they are not simply describing distant disasters. They are reminding their people that destruction can return if humanity loses balance. The ant people, then, are more than helpers of history. They are guardians of a pattern, beings who step forward only when the continuity of life is at risk. In this way, their story carries both comfort and warning. Comfort, because they once provided shelter. Warning, because it means such shelter may be needed again. Some say the underground chambers were so vast that entire communities could dwell within them, with separate areas for food, water, rest, and ceremony. These chambers, carefully carved and reinforced, were said to be illuminated not by flame but by some natural glow. Whether it was bioluminescent plants, glowing stones, or something unknown, the Hopi remembered that there was always enough light to live by, yet never so much that it wasted energy. The steady dimness encouraged reflection, quiet work, and a rhythm of life that matched the Earth's heartbeat. For children who heard these tales, the image of underground cities filled with soft light must have felt both mysterious and safe, like a second home hidden beneath the surface. The ant people's gift was not only in shelter, but in teaching how to endure long periods without change. They showed the Hopi how to live in cycles, storing and using resources wisely, waiting patiently until the time was right to emerge. This mirrored the agricultural cycles that would later define Hopi life, where patience and timing could mean the difference between abundance and hunger. In every way, the ant people seemed to embody the principle of balance. They were not gods, nor were they ordinary animals. They existed in the space between, close enough to teach, distant enough to remain mysterious. Their memory is carried into Hopi ceremonies, where dancers sometimes wear headdresses or masks that echo insect-like features. Outsiders may see them as costumes, but to the Hopi they are symbols, a way of honouring those who once protected their ancestors. Every movement in such ceremonies is deliberate, reminding both dancers and watchers that history lives not only in words, but in the body and spirit of a people. To tell the story of the ant people is to tell the story of survival, cooperation, and the hidden allies who shape human destiny from the shadows beneath the earth. As the Hopi reflect on their past, the ant people are never spoken of with fear, but always with gratitude. Their memory is one of guidance during humanity's most fragile moments. The Hopi understood that without the refuge provided underground, the great catastrophes of fire, ice, and flood would have ended their line entirely. This gratitude was not casual. It was woven into songs, dances, and prayers, so that each generation would remember where their endurance came from. Even today, when ceremonies are performed in the kivas, the sipapu in the floor is a reminder that life once continued only because a passage existed to the world below. The ant people's lessons go beyond survival skills. They taught that every act must serve the whole, that nothing exists in isolation. A grain of corn, a drop of water, a moment of patience. Each has meaning when seen as part of the greater circle of life. The Hopi carried this understanding into their daily lives, practicing dry farming techniques that conserve scarce rainwater, planting crops in patterns that protect the soil, and living in stone villages that harmonize with the landscape. This balance with the earth mirrors the values learned underground, where waste could mean death and cooperation meant life. Some elders hint that the ant people may still dwell in hidden chambers, unseen by the surface world, watching quietly to ensure that humans do not forget the lessons of humility. They are not portrayed as distant deities, but as neighbours of a different kind, closer to the earth's core than to the sky. Their continued presence in Hopi thought suggests that the boundary between myth and reality is not as clear as outsiders imagine. When anthropologists visited Hopi lands in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were often told fragments of the ant people story. Yet the full depth of the tale was rarely shared, as some truths were considered too sacred to give to those who might not respect them. What was shared, however, always carried the same themes: compassion, shelter, and the idea that even in the darkest times, unseen helpers can guide humanity back into the light. Rock carvings found near ancient settlements sometimes depict figures with large heads and thin bodies standing alongside patterns of stars. To some, these are simple abstractions. To others, they are artistic echoes of the ant people and their connection to the cosmos. Whether literal or symbolic, they continue to inspire curiosity, suggesting that beneath the desert's silence lies a hidden chapter of human history. To listen to the Hopi tell it, the ant people are not gone. They remain part of the rhythm of existence, ready to return when balance falters again. The Hopi do not imagine time as a straight line, but as a series of cycles, each with its own rise, fall, and renewal. The ant people appear at the turning points of these cycles, when destruction threatens to erase humanity. This cyclical worldview gives their story a timeless quality, as though the ant people are not bound to one era, but remain connected to every age of change. In the first world, fire consumed the land, and the ant people guided survivors beneath the earth until the flames passed. In the second world, when ice locked the ground and cold made life impossible, they again opened their chambers to human guests. In the third world, floods swept away everything familiar, and once more, the underground shelters became the only hope. With each emergence into a new world, the Hopi carried lessons that had been taught in silence, patience, and cooperation. They remembered that survival was never a matter of conquest, but of humility and gratitude. When people return to the surface, the elders say, they are not the same as before. They are reshaped by the darkness, strengthened by the discipline of rationing, and reminded that life is fragile. The ant people's role is not merely practical but spiritual. Their example shows that in times of crisis, humanity must turn inward, slow its pace, and find guidance in unexpected places. The Hopi see this as a truth about the earth itself. When imbalance grows too great, the world resets, and new beginnings are made possible. Some stories describe the ant people as having a special awareness of celestial signs. They seemed to know when destruction was coming, as though they could read the stars or sense vibrations in the earth. Whether literal or symbolic, this detail gave them the role of watchful guardians, preparing for changes before humans understood them. For the Hopi, this knowledge was a reminder that wisdom often lies in observation, not in rushing forward blindly. The ant people's gift was foresight, the ability to act before disaster struck. This teaching became part of Hopi culture, where ceremonies and calendars are tied to the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. Every cycle of planting and harvest, every ritual of renewal, reflects the idea that survival depends on attention to natural rhythms. Even now, when modern life moves quickly, the Hopi remind themselves of the ant people whenever they gather in the kivas. The small sipapu in the floor is more than a symbol. It is a doorway of memory, leading back to a time when quiet helpers beneath the earth ensured that life would not be lost forever. The mesas of northern Arizona hold more than villages. They hold memory. For the Hopi, every stone and every shadow is tied to stories passed down through countless generations. Among those stories, the ant people remain one of the most enduring. Their presence is not marked by ruins or artifacts, but by whispers in ceremonies, by patterns carved into rock, and by lessons that shape daily life. The Hopi say the ant people's homes were deep within the earth, yet always close enough to reach when disaster struck. These chambers, described as vast and carefully arranged, were places of both safety and discipline. Life underground was not easy, but it was ordered, and in that order lay survival. The Hopi ancestors, guided by their hosts, learned how to create balance between taking and giving, between storing and sharing. These lessons would later become essential in farming the desert, where every drop of rain and every seed carried immense value, Some elders explained that the ant people were small in stature but strong in spirit, their features adapted to a life without sunlight. They were remembered not for their appearance alone, but for their generosity. They gave food, they shared water, and they offered knowledge without demanding anything in return. Such acts were not forgotten. Gratitude became a central theme in Hopi thought, teaching that survival is never achieved alone but through cooperation with others, human, animal, or unseen. Petroglyphs scattered across the southwest sometimes show beings with large rounded heads and thin bodies, their shapes distinct from ordinary human figures. For the Hopi, these carvings serve as echoes of their protectors. Outsiders may call them abstract, but within Hopi tradition they are reminders etched in stone. To look upon them is to remember that in times of catastrophe, help once came from beneath the ground. Some say the ant people's wisdom extended beyond the earth. They seem to know the movements of the stars, guiding the Hopi to align their lives with celestial rhythms. Planting, harvesting, and ceremonies were all tied to the sky, yet the teachings began underground, where patience was learned in the dim light. The ant people showed that survival is not only physical but spiritual, requiring balance between inner stillness and outer action. Even now, when the Hopi gather in kivas, the sipapu stands as a silent link between worlds. It is a small opening, yet it represents a vast history, a passage once used to move from darkness into light. In remembering the ant people, the Hopi remember themselves, a people shaped not just by the desert above but by the quiet, unseen guardians below. When the Hopi elders spoke of the ant people, they often emphasized the silence of the underground world. In that silence, every sound mattered. The drip of water, the shifting of stone, the quiet movement of many feet in narrow tunnels. This environment, strange at first to humans, soon became a teacher of patience and awareness. The Hopi learned that listening was as important as speaking, and that by paying attention to the smallest signals, one could avoid danger and find opportunity. The ant people embodied this lesson perfectly. They were not loud, not boastful, but steady and precise in all that they did. Their way of life was ordered and disciplined, built on cooperation and foresight. The Hopi who lived among them carried these values back to the surface, shaping a culture that prized balance over excess and endurance over haste. Some stories describe how the ant people showed the Hopi ways to use underground resources that surface dwellers might overlook. Roots, fungi and minerals provided nourishment, while carefully stored seeds ensured future harvests. It was a way of living that made even scarcity sustainable. This wisdom would later echo in Hopi agriculture, where survival in the desert required the same care and foresight. There are accounts that suggest the ant people also had knowledge of medicine. They understood which plants could heal wounds, which minerals could ease sickness, and how rest in cool chambers could restore strength. To the Hopi, these teachings were invaluable, reminders that the earth itself provides for those who respect it. The ant people were never described as conquerors or masters, but as neighbours who shared what they knew. Their generosity left a lasting impression, becoming part of the Hopi's understanding of what it means to live in harmony with others. Rock art across the southwest occasionally shows figures with outstretched arms, surrounded by patterns of lines or circles. Some interpret these as symbols of energy, perhaps even depictions of light underground. Whether literal or symbolic, they reinforce the sense that the ant people were linked to forces beyond ordinary human knowledge. The Hopi never claimed to fully understand their hosts, but they remembered the compassion shown in times of great peril. For listeners today, these stories remind us that survival is not only about strength, but about humility and trust. The Hopi ancestors emerged from the underworld carrying this knowledge, prepared to begin life anew in the fourth world. The memory of the ant people remains as a quiet assurance that even in the darkest times, help can come from unexpected places. In the Hopi worldview, the story of the ant people is not distant myth but a thread woven into daily life. Every planting season, every harvest, every ceremonial gathering carries echoes of the lessons learned underground. The ant people are remembered for their patience and their discipline, qualities that ensured survival when the surface of the world was uninhabitable. The elders say that while firestorms raged, or while ice held the land, or while waters rose, life continued quietly beneath the earth. There, the ant people kept their chambers warm and dry, filled with food and light. They did not despair, nor did they panic. They worked steadily, storing what was needed, sharing what they had, and waiting for the right time to return. This steady rhythm became a model for Hopi life. In the desert, where rains are rare and crops grow slowly, the same patience is required. The Hopi plant seeds deep into the dry soil, trusting that rain will come, just as their ancestors once trusted that the ant people would guide them back to the surface. Petroglyphs carved into stone cliffs often show spirals, stars and beings with unusual shapes. For the Hopi, these are not random marks but sacred reminders of the past. Some spirals are said to represent the journey from one world to another, mirroring the passage through the Sipapu. Figures with round heads and slender bodies, often surrounded by dots or rays, are seen as memories of those who lived below. Outsiders may see art. The Hopi see history written in stone. Some traditions even describe how the ant people possessed a kind of inner light. Their eyes were said to glow softly, illuminating the dark chambers without fire. This detail fascinated listeners, suggesting that the ant people were perfectly adapted to their environment. To the Hopi, it was further proof that the earth contains mysteries beyond human understanding. Life underground was not easy, but it was safe, and in that safety the Hopi learned humility. They discovered that survival was not about dominating the world above, but about adapting to the world they were given. The ant people showed them that cooperation, foresight, and balance were stronger than fear. When the time came to emerge, the Hopi carried these lessons upward, into the sunlight of the fourth world. To this day, when they gather in kivas and look at the Sipapu, they remember that passage. It is a reminder that even when the world seems to end, new beginnings wait below, nurtured by unseen hands. For the Hopi, every generation is a link in a long chain, and the story of the ant people ensures that no link forgets its place. The ancestors who once descended into the earth were not abandoned to darkness. They were welcomed, taught, and preserved until it was safe to rise again. This act of protection shaped the Hopi view of the world as a place where unseen helpers exist, not to dominate but to guide. The ant people are remembered as diligent, their movements purposeful, their lives devoted to the collective good. To the Hopi, this mirrored the behaviour of actual ants on the surface, always working together, storing food and creating order beneath the soil. The comparison was so strong that the very name ant people became the natural way to describe them. Yet in the stories, these beings were not insects, but people of a different kind, with qualities that made them mysterious but never frightening. They are described as smaller than humans, with elongated limbs and large eyes that glowed faintly. Some say they communicated more through gestures or thought than through spoken language. This quietness became another lesson, that wisdom often comes in silence, and that the deepest truths require listening rather than speaking. Archaeological sites in the southwest sometimes reveal networks of ancient dwellings carved into stone, leading some to wonder whether they echo memories of subterranean homes. While scholars debate their origins, the Hopi see them as part of a much older story, the time when humans lived side by side with those who thrived underground. The ant people's generosity was shown not only in shelter, but in sharing knowledge of balance. They taught that to survive, one must never take more than is needed, and one must always think of the community before the self. These principles carried forward into Hopi farming and ceremony, where cooperation remains essential. The Sipapu, the small opening in the kiva floor, is a reminder of emergence. Every time it is seen, it connects the Hopi to their past, to the journey from darkness to light. Outsiders may see only an architectural detail, but for the Hopi, it is a sacred doorway, proof that survival is always possible with patience and humility. When elders tell the story of the ant people, they do so not as entertainment but as guidance. It is a quiet reassurance that even when the world feels uncertain, the memory of protection remains, carried like a hidden ember through time. The ant people may not be visible today, but their lessons shape the way the Hopi walk upon the earth, careful, balanced, and always aware of the cycles that turn endlessly above and below. In Hopi tradition, stories are not fixed like written texts, but alive, shaped by the voices of those who tell them. Each elder adds a detail remembered from their teacher, and so the memory of the ant people continues like an unbroken song. One elder might describe how the underground chambers were vast, with walls smoothed by careful hands, while another recalls how food was stored in clay jars sealed to keep out moisture. Another might speak of the faint glow that lit the tunnels, never flickering, always steady, a light that seemed part of the earth itself. Such variations do not weaken the story, they strengthen it, showing that its truth lies not in exact measurements, but in the living continuity of memory. For the Hopi, the ant people were proof that life exists in places unseen. While others looked to the sky for salvation, the Hopi remembered that rescue came from beneath the ground. The ant people taught that the world above and the world below are not separate but connected. Just as seeds rest in darkness before sprouting in sunlight, so too did humanity rest below before emerging into new life. This pattern is reflected in every planting season, every ceremony of renewal. The Hopi saw their survival as part of a larger rhythm, where endings give way to beginnings, and where help often comes from unexpected sources. Some elders say the ant people were skilled observers of the heavens. They seemed to know when destruction was near, as though they could read the signs in the stars. This link between the underground and the celestial gave the Hopi a sense that the ant people were guardians of both earth and sky. Their role was not to dominate, but to guide, stepping forward only when needed. Rock carvings in remote canyons show figures with elongated shapes standing beside spirals and star patterns. For the Hopi, these are not decorations but records, reminders that their ancestors once walked with beings who carried wisdom from beyond ordinary human experience. Outsiders may wonder whether these carvings suggest encounters with something otherworldly, but for the Hopi the message is simpler. Life endures through cooperation, and knowledge must be shared in times of need. When the Hopi emerged into the fourth world, they carried with them not only survival, but gratitude. The ant people faded back into their hidden chambers, but the memory of their generosity remained. To this day the story is told softly, like a prayer, reminding listeners that in times of hardship, help may arrive quietly from places we least expect. When the Hopi speak of the ant people, they do not describe them as distant legends, but as part of their own ancestry of survival. These beings, though different in form, became woven into the Hopi sense of identity. They were remembered not only for providing refuge, but for showing how life can flourish even in hidden places. The ant people were masters of preparation, always storing for the future, always thinking ahead. In their underground chambers, food was carefully divided so that no one went without, and every member of the community played a role. This sense of shared responsibility left a deep mark on the Hopi, who learned to see farming and daily life not as personal tasks but as communal duties. To plant corn was to feed not only oneself but the entire village. To store seeds was to ensure that future generations would survive. The Hopi learned to mirror the ant people's discipline, seeing that strength is not found in abundance but in careful stewardship. Some traditions say that during their time underground, the Hopi were shown sacred patterns, ways of arranging fields, ways of marking time, ways of aligning their ceremonies with the heavens. These patterns became part of their culture, guiding planting and harvest, dances and prayers. To the Hopi, these teachings were not inventions but gifts, lessons that came from those who lived in darkness yet understood light. Rock art across the mesas sometimes depicts figures with round heads and lines radiating outward, as if to show energy or glow. For the Hopi, Such carvings are not random but echoes of what their ancestors saw. They stand as silent proof, etched into stone, that the memory of the ant people is older than written words. When the Hopi finally emerged into the fourth world, they carried more than survival. They carried gratitude, a deep understanding that life depends on harmony. The ant people returned to their hidden dwellings, but their lessons remained above. Even now, in ceremonies performed in kivas, the small opening of the sipapu connects the people to that memory. It is a passage of remembrance, a doorway between worlds, a reminder that survival is never achieved alone. To speak of the ant people is to speak of humility, of the wisdom that comes from cooperation, and of the quiet assurance that even in the darkest times, the earth itself holds allies waiting to help humanity endure. In Hopi tradition, the story of the ant people is never told as mere entertainment. It is carried as a reminder, a guide for how to live in balance. The ancestors, sheltered beneath the ground during the destruction of earlier worlds, learned lessons that were more than practical. They were spiritual, shaping the way the Hopi viewed their place in the universe. The ant people showed them that survival requires respect for resources, for community, and for the natural order. The underground dwellings were a school of patience. In the stillness, time stretched differently. Days were measured not by sunlight but by the rhythm of work and rest, of preparing food, of sharing water. The Hopi learned to live without rushing, to move with care, and to value each task no matter how small. This way of life became a foundation for their own culture, where farming in the desert required the same discipline and trust. Some versions of the story say that the ant people had a deep awareness of the earth itself. They could sense tremors, hear the movement of water underground, and predict changes long before they arrived. To the Hopi, this knowledge was both mysterious and reassuring. It meant that the world offered signs for those who listened, and that by observing carefully, one could survive even in the harshest conditions. Rock carvings and pottery designs sometimes reflect these teachings, showing patterns of spirals, waves, or concentric circles. These symbols are not only artistic but reminders of cycles, of movement from one world to another, from danger to safety, from darkness to light. The ant people, though hidden now, are still part of that cycle. Elders often say they have not disappeared, only retreated, waiting until humanity once again needs guidance. This belief creates a sense of continuity, as though the Hopi walk each day with unseen neighbours below their feet. For outsiders, such stories might appear as myths, but for the Hopi they are truths carried through generations, no less real than the mesas rising against the desert sky. The sipapu in the kiva floor embodies this connection. Each time it is seen during ceremony, it reminds the people of the passage from the underground to the surface, from one world into another. It is small, almost unnoticeable to visitors, but to the Hopi it is vast. A doorway of memory linking them to the time when the ant people ensured humanity's survival. The ant people are remembered not only for their actions, but for the values they embodied. They showed the Hopi that strength lies in unity, that survival is built on cooperation rather than competition. Each member of their community had a role, and each role was honoured. No effort was wasted, no contribution ignored. This model of living became an example for the Hopi villages above the ground. In the desert, where resources are scarce, such discipline is essential. The Hopi saw their farming, their ceremonies, and even their daily routines as reflections of what had once been taught in the silence of the underground world. Some elders described the ant people as beings who never hoarded wealth or power. Instead, they lived with simplicity, keeping only what was needed and sharing the rest. This generosity shaped the Hopi understanding of balance. To take more than the earth offered was seen as dangerous, not only for the individual but for the whole community. In ceremonies, songs often echo this teaching, reminding listeners that abundance is not measured by possessions, but by harmony with life. Petroglyphs etched into canyon walls show figures surrounded by patterns of dots and lines. Some interpret these as depictions of stars, linking the ant people to the heavens above. Others see them as records of the underground chambers where glowing stones or mysterious lights sustained life. Whatever the meaning, they are evidence of how deeply the memory of these beings was carved into Hopi tradition. For the Hopi, these carvings are not art alone, but testimony, proof left for future generations to see. When the Hopi emerged into the fourth world, they did so carrying gratitude. They did not forget the generosity that had saved them, and they sought to live in a way that honoured it. Farming became more than survival. It became a spiritual act, a way of continuing the lessons of patience and foresight. Even the smallest act of planting a seed was tied to the larger memory of having once been sustained in darkness. Outsiders may hear the story and think of myth, but for the Hopi it is identity. The ant people are not gone, because their teachings are alive in every field of corn, every sipapoo in the kiva, every song sung to mark the turning of the seasons. To tell their story is to remember that help comes in many forms, sometimes from the earth below, sometimes from the stars above, but always when balance is at risk. For the Hopi, remembering the ant people is also remembering the responsibility that came with survival. To be sheltered when the world above was destroyed was not simply luck. It was a gift, one that required gratitude through action. This is why their ceremonies stress balance and humility, why their farming methods are careful rather than wasteful, and why their stories emphasize cooperation over pride. The ant people taught that no one survives alone. Just as ants work together in endless cooperation, so too must people. When the ancestors emerged into the fourth world, they carried this lesson into their new lives, shaping a culture where every person is tied to the community as a whole. Some Hopi accounts describe how the ant people taught them to see time differently. Underground, days were not measured by sunrise and sunset, but by the rhythm of labour and rest, of sharing food, of telling stories. This slower sense of time reminded the Hopi that patience was the foundation of endurance. In the desert, where crops take months to grow under harsh conditions, this teaching proved vital. They learned that waiting is not weakness, but strength. For those who wait wisely ensure survival. Petroglyphs on the cliffs sometimes show spirals that lead inward, symbols of descent into the earth. Others show spirals leading outward, symbols of emergence into a new world. Together these images reflect the Hopi understanding of cycles, that life is always a movement between darkness and light, between loss and renewal. The ant people stand at the centre of this movement, guides who appear when humanity must cross from one world to the next. Outsiders often wonder if such beings were real in a physical sense, or if they were spiritual guides represented in story. The Hopi answer does not divide those categories. For them, what matters is that the lessons are true, carried through generations without being lost. Whether the ant people walked in flesh or spirit, their role remains the same. They were helpers in the hour of greatest need. The sipapoo in every kiva is a small but powerful reminder of this truth. It connects the present to the past, the surface to the underground, the human to the more than human. Each ceremony performed around it renews the memory of survival and the responsibility to live in balance. To honour the ant people is to honour the earth itself, and to remember that in times of crisis, salvation may come quietly, from places hidden yet always near. The Hopi view the ant people as part of a much larger story of the universe. Their legends describe multiple worlds, each destroyed when humanity fell out of balance. The ant people appear as guardians during those transitions, ensuring that life continues when destruction sweeps the surface. This role gives them a timeless quality. They are not bound to one disaster or one era, but remain present whenever humanity faces the end of a cycle. Their presence is felt most strongly in the memory of survival. When fire, ice, or flood threatened to erase everything, it was they who opened their doors beneath the earth. Life in their chambers is described as orderly, steady, and safe. The Hopi say that while the surface burned, froze, or drowned, the underground remained calm. Food was stored, water was rationed, and light glowed softly from unknown sources. These details gave the stories their strength. They were not vague but specific, remembered carefully by each generation. Children who listened learned more than history. They learned patience, humility, and the importance of caring for others. To this day, Hopi life reflects these values. Their farming practices show restraint, never exhausting the land. Their ceremonies emphasize gratitude, reminding them of the gifts received in times of need. Rock carvings that show tall, thin figures with round heads are seen by some as evidence of these ancient teachers. Outsiders may debate their meaning, but for the Hopi, the carvings speak of continuity. They are records of what was experienced, etched into stone so that the story would never fade. The Sipapu, small and simple, is another such record. Each time the Hopi look upon it, they are reminded of the journey from darkness to light, from underground chambers to open skies. It is not only a symbol of emergence but a reminder of responsibility. To survive with help obliges one to live with respect. The ant people may have withdrawn from sight, but their influence remains. Every season of planting and harvest, every prayer for rain, every song sung in ceremony carries a trace of their lessons. They are remembered not as distant myths but as neighbours in the great cycles of life, appearing when needed and retreating when balance is restored. For the Hopi, this memory ensures that even in uncertain times there is always hope, for help has come before and may come again. The story of the ant people also carries a message about perspective. To those who lived only on the surface, survival seemed impossible when fire swept across the land, when ice locked rivers, or when floods covered the valleys. Yet to the ant people, who made their homes beneath the ground, the disasters above were only passing storms. Their world continued in calm order, untouched by the chaos overhead. For the Hopi, this showed that survival often depends on changing where you stand. What seems like the end from one view may be manageable from another. The lesson was clear: adapt, move, and seek balance, for the earth always provides more than one path. In their underground world, the ant people modelled how to endure hardship with dignity. Food was never wasted, water was treasured, and every action was deliberate. The Hopi remembered these teachings when they returned to the desert surface. To this day, their dry farming methods reflect the same discipline. They plant seeds deep into the soil so that even the smallest rainfall will reach them. They arrange fields to conserve moisture, and they see farming as a sacred act, not just a task. These practices echo the order of life underground, where survival came through careful balance. Some Hopi accounts suggest that the ant people were not limited to one place, but had networks of chambers stretching far beneath the land. These tunnels, like veins, carried air, water, and life across great distances. Whether literal or symbolic, the image is powerful. Survival is not the work of one, but of many, connected and supporting each other. Petroglyphs carved into cliffs sometimes show long lines of figures, perhaps recalling these communities below. Outsiders interpret them in many ways, but for the Hopi, they are part of the memory of those who once helped humanity endure. The Sipapu in the kiva floor embodies this understanding of connection. It is a small opening, yet it represents vastness, the link between surface and underworld, between destruction and renewal. Every time a ceremony circles around it, the Hopi are reminded that they are part of something larger, guided by lessons older than memory. The ant people may not walk openly today, but their wisdom continues in silence, carried in the way the Hopi live with patience, humility, and respect for the fragile balance of life. The ant people are remembered as quiet guardians, but their role in Hopi memory is greater than simply offering shelter. They represent the principle that knowledge exists in unexpected places, often hidden until the moment it is needed most. The Hopi say that when their ancestors were taken underground, they did not simply wait for danger to pass. They learned. They learned how to preserve seeds in ways that kept them alive through long seasons, how to ration food so that each person had enough, and how to remain patient when time felt endless. These were not skills for survival alone, but lessons for living in harmony with the earth. To this day, Hopi farmers plant with intention, treating every seed as sacred, every drop of rain as a gift. This reverence reflects the time when the ant people showed them that life thrives through respect, not waste. Some elders describe the ant people's chambers as honeycomb-like, stretching far into the stone. In these passages, the Hopi felt both safety and wonder. The air was cool, the light dim, and the sounds muted. For children raised on these stories, the underground world seemed both mysterious and reassuring, a place where danger could not reach, and where every action had purpose. Rock art scattered across the southwest often mirrors these accounts. Spirals etched into canyon walls are said to represent the journey between worlds. Figures with large heads and slender bodies stand beside star patterns, linking the ant people not only to the earth below but to the heavens above. This dual connection, of being both underground dwellers and sky watchers, gave them an almost cosmic significance. They were beings of transition, guiding humanity between destruction and renewal, between darkness and light. The Sipapu in the Kiva is the constant reminder of this truth. It is a small opening, but it holds the weight of entire worlds. Every ceremony performed around it reconnects the Hopi to the story of survival, to the time when the ant people's generosity allowed life to continue. Outsiders may debate whether these beings were physical or symbolic, but for the Hopi the question matters less than the memory itself. What is remembered is what shapes life, and what is carried through generations becomes truth. The ant people remain a symbol of resilience, teaching that even in silence, even in hidden places, wisdom waits to be shared when the world needs it most. For the Hopi, the ant people are not frozen in the past. They remain part of a living memory, tied to the cycles of destruction and renewal that shape each world. Elders teach that humanity is now in the fourth world, but this too is only temporary. One day it will end, and what comes after will depend on whether balance has been kept. The ant people symbolize hope within this cycle, a reminder that help has appeared before and may appear again. Their story warns against arrogance, against believing that humans alone control their fate. When fire consumed the first world, it was not strength but humility that saved the survivors. When ice buried the second, it was patience and cooperation that preserved them. When floods drowned the third, it was generosity that opened the doors below. Each time, the ant people did not act as masters but as guides, providing refuge until renewal was possible. Some elders say that the ant people still walk below, waiting quietly, listening for the moment when balance is threatened again. They are not absent but hidden, like seeds in the earth before spring. This belief gives comfort, that even in the darkest times, unseen allies remain. Rock carvings continue to echo this faith. Spirals show the turning of worlds, star patterns link the ant people to the heavens, and thin-bodied figures with round heads remind the people of those who once opened their homes. These carvings are not only art but testimony, left for future generations to remember. In Kiva ceremonies, the Sipapu is the most sacred reminder. It is a passage of memory, connecting the present world with those before. Each dance, each song performed around it renews the bond with the ant people, ensuring that their lessons remain alive. Outsiders may see myth, but the Hopi see history woven with spirit. The ant people are part of who they are, part of why they endure in the desert against all odds. Their story is not one of conquest or glory, but of humility, patience, and gratitude. It tells that survival is not achieved by force, but by listening, sharing, and respecting the gifts of the earth. In carrying this story forward, the Hopi ensure that even if the fourth world ends, the wisdom that once saved them will not be lost. The Hopi see their connection to the ant people reflected in the very land where they live. The mesas rise above vast deserts, their stone walls etched with petroglyphs that whisper of ancient times. To outsiders, These carvings may appear mysterious, but to the Hopi, they are reminders of journeys taken long ago. Figures with large heads and thin bodies stand alongside spirals, stars, and pathways. Each symbol holds meaning, tracing the story of descent into the earth and emergence into new worlds. The ant people are central to these images because they represent continuity, the bridge between destruction and survival, between endings and beginnings. In telling their story, elders often stress that the ant people never sought recognition. They gave without demanding tribute, they sheltered without expecting reward. Their generosity was their strength. This humility became a model for the Hopi way of life. Even today, when fields are planted or ceremonies are held, gratitude is offered not just to the sun and the rain, but to those hidden helpers of the past. It is said that when the ancestors lived underground, they learned to see the world differently. Without sunlight, they discovered the importance of inner light. Without abundance, they learned the value of sharing. Without movement, they found strength in patience. These lessons remained when they returned to the surface, shaping a culture built on endurance and balance. Some traditions describe the ant people as being deeply connected to the stars. They seemed to know when disasters were coming, guiding the Hopi to safety before destruction struck. This link between the underground and the heavens gave them a unique place in the Hopi worldview. Beings who lived beneath the soil but understood the rhythms of the cosmos. Their dual nature made them symbols of unity, showing that the seen and the unseen, the earthly and the celestial, are never truly separate. The Sipapu in the kiva is the living reminder of this connection. Small and simple, it represents the great passage between worlds, the journey made possible through the generosity of the ant people. Every ceremony around it renews the bond, ensuring that the memory never fades. To tell the story today is to remind listeners that survival depends on humility, that strength comes from cooperation, and that help often arrives quietly from places beyond sight. The ant people remain a symbol of hope, showing that even in times of chaos, guidance waits in silence, ready to lead humanity back toward balance. For the Hopi, the ant people are more than ancient memory. They are woven into the rhythm of every season. When the first seeds are pressed into the dry soil, the story is remembered. When clouds gather in the summer sky, prayers carry the same lessons of humility once taught underground. The ant people's gift was not only survival during catastrophe, but the wisdom of how to live afterward. They showed that food must be preserved carefully, that water must never be wasted, and that community must always come before the individual. These values carried into Hopi farming, where corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, are planted together, each helping the others grow. Just as the ant people lived in cooperation, so too do these plants thrive in unity. The Hopi see this as more than agriculture. It is a living reminder of lessons once learned in darkness. Some traditions say the ant people possessed a kind of foresight. They knew when destruction was coming, guiding the Hopi into safety before the surface collapsed. This gift made them guardians of time itself, beings who could read the signs of the heavens and the earth. Rock carving showing figures beside stars may reflect this role, suggesting that they were as much sky watchers as earth dwellers. Their knowledge linked the below and the above, grounding the Hopi in a worldview where everything is connected. Life underground was remembered as disciplined but not harsh. The ant people were kind, teaching through example rather than command. They worked constantly, never wasting effort, and their order became the model for Hopi endurance. The ancestors who lived among them returned to the surface with a sense of gratitude so deep that it shaped every aspect of their culture. Even now, the Sipapu in the kiva is not only a symbol of emergence but of responsibility, a reminder that the gift of survival carries the duty to live with balance. Outsiders may wonder if the ant people were real in a physical sense or symbolic figures of wisdom. For the Hopi, the question is unnecessary. Reality is defined not only by what can be touched, but by what endures in memory and practice. The ant people endure in every story told to children, in every field planted, in every ceremony where the Sipapu is honoured. They remain guides, reminding humanity that help can come quietly, in times of greatest need, from places hidden yet ever near. When the Hopi tell of the ant people, they do so in voices that are calm, steady, and reverent, as though repeating a prayer. The story is not one of spectacle, but of quiet endurance, passed down so that no generation forgets the source of their survival. The ant people are described as neighbours beneath the earth, living in ordered communities, always prepared for scarcity, always ready to share. Their lessons were simple yet profound. Waste nothing, take only what is needed, and work together so that all may endure. These principles became part of Hopi life, shaping how villages farmed, how ceremonies were performed, and how each person saw themselves within the greater whole. The underground world was remembered not as a place of despair, but of discipline and learning. The faint glow of mysterious light made the chambers calm rather than frightening, a setting where the Hopi ancestors discovered strength in patience. They learned to measure time differently, not by the rising sun but by the rhythm of tasks completed and food carefully divided. This change in perspective gave them resilience when they returned to the surface, where farming in the desert required the same steady endurance. Some traditions suggest that the ant people had knowledge beyond the physical. They seemed to sense the cycles of the earth and the heavens, knowing when catastrophe would arrive. This foresight gave the Hopi confidence that they were guided not only by chance but by wisdom greater than their own. Rock carvings of spirals and star patterns, alongside thin-bodied figures, remind the people of this connection. The ant people were not only dwellers below, but observers of the skies above, beings who understood that survival requires harmony with both earth and cosmos. The sipapu in the kiva is the living link to these memories. Each time a ceremony is held, the small opening becomes a doorway to the past, recalling the journey from darkness into light, from destruction into renewal. It is a reminder that survival is always possible if humility and gratitude are preserved. Outsiders may call the ant people myth, but the Hopi know them as part of their identity, as teachers who shape the way they live even today. Their presence is felt in every harvest, every prayer for rain, every story told beside the fire. To remember them is to remember that life endures not through conquest but through cooperation, and that in times of greatest trial, unseen allies may once again guide humanity into a new beginning. The Hopi often describe their traditions as paths, and the story of the ant people is one of the oldest and most carefully preserved. It is not told to inspire fear, but to encourage mindfulness, reminding each listener that survival comes from preparation, humility, and gratitude. The ant people are remembered as small but strong, their underground homes filled with carefully arranged chambers where life could continue when the surface was lost to catastrophe. These chambers were said to be organized like great storerooms, where seeds, water, and roots were preserved in perfect order. Nothing was wasted, and everything was shared. For the Hopi, this became a lasting example of how a community should live. Each person has a role, and every role has meaning, no matter how small. This way of thinking was carried upward when the ancestors emerged into the fourth world, shaping a culture that still prizes balance, cooperation, and patience. Some versions of the story say that the ant people were deeply connected to the natural cycles of the earth. They could hear the movement of water underground, sense the trembling of stone, and recognize the approach of storms. To the Hopi, these gifts were not magic, but part of a wisdom born from living close to the earth. They taught that if humans listened carefully, they too could understand the rhythms of nature. Rock carvings showing spirals and star patterns reflect this teaching, linking the ant people to both the underworld and the heavens. They were beings of transition, guides who could move between realms and bring knowledge to those who needed it most. The sipapu in every kiva keeps this connection alive. To stand before it is to stand at the boundary between worlds, to remember the passage once made with the help of unseen neighbours below. Outsiders may view the ant people as a curious legend, but for the Hopi, they remain a truth woven into identity. They symbolise endurance in times of destruction, generosity in times of scarcity, and guidance in times of uncertainty. Each time the story is told, it is not only the past that is remembered, but the possibility of the future. The ant people may return if balance falters again, ready to open their doors when humanity most needs to be reminded of humility and cooperation. Their story endures not because it entertains, but because it teaches how to live with respect for the earth and for each other. The Hopi speak of the ant people with a calm reverence, as though describing close relatives who stepped forward in humanity's darkest hours. Their story is not locked in the past, but alive in every ritual, every planting, every reminder that survival is never guaranteed without respect. The ant people are remembered as beings who lived in balance, their underground chambers carefully ordered, their lives devoted to the community rather than the self. This image became a guide for Hopi society above ground. In the desert, where every resource is precious, their lessons were more than helpful. They were essential. Farming on the high mesas requires trust and patience, as rain may fall only a few times each season. Seeds are planted deep, their growth slow, but the harvest, when it comes, sustains entire villages. This rhythm mirrors the way the ant people endured underground, living in dim light, storing food carefully, and waiting with quiet strength. The Hopi understood that survival is not a race but a cycle, and in this cycle every act of care becomes vital. Some traditions describe the ant people as having luminous eyes, glowing softly like embers in the dark. This detail fascinated listeners, suggesting adaptation to a life without sunlight. To the Hopi, it symbolized inner light, the ability to carry hope even when surrounded by shadow. In times of destruction, this inner light guided both the ant people and the humans they sheltered. Petroglyphs carved into stone faces across the southwest often show beings with large heads, elongated bodies, and rays extending outward. Some researchers see these as abstract or symbolic, but for the Hopi, they are reminders of the protectors who once opened their homes. The spirals carved nearby may represent the descent into the earth and the later emergence into the fourth world. Together, these images form a map of memory showing the journey from catastrophe to renewal. The Sipapu in the Kiva is another such map, small yet profound. It is a doorway between worlds, a reminder of the passage once taken with the ant people's guidance. Every ceremony performed around it renews the bond, tying the present to the ancient past. Outsiders may wonder whether the ant people were physical beings or spiritual guides, but for the Hopi, the distinction matters little. What matters is the truth of the lessons carried forward: humility, patience, generosity, and respect for the cycles of the earth. The ant people embody the idea that help comes not through conquest, but through compassion, not through noise, but through silence. To tell their story today is to remind humanity that in times of imbalance, unseen allies may once again emerge, guiding the way into another beginning. For the Hopi, the ant people are inseparable from the idea of renewal. Each time humanity faced destruction, these beings opened their hidden chambers and offered protection until the storms of fire, ice, or flood had passed. In this way, they became symbols of cycles that move through time, endings that give rise to beginnings, silence that gives way to song, darkness that prepares the way for light. The Hopi do not see history as a line, but as a circle, and the ant people stand at the turning points of that circle. They are remembered as neighbours who never sought worship or power, but who stepped forward only when humanity's survival was at stake. Their homes beneath the ground were described as vast networks of rooms and corridors, shaped with care, always orderly, always purposeful. In those chambers, the Hopi ancestors found safety, but also lessons. They learned to live with patience, to share resources, and to trust that life continues even in places unseen. These teachings carried into the surface world, where farming in the desert demanded the same discipline and faith. Some accounts say that the ant people possessed knowledge of the heavens as well as the earth. They could sense when great changes were coming, as though guided by the stars. Petroglyphs showing star patterns alongside thin-bodied figures support this memory. reminding the Hopi that their helpers were not bound to a single realm, but connected to both sky and soil. This dual nature gave the ant people their special place in Hopi thought, guardians of balance who could guide humanity through destruction into renewal. Outsiders may question whether these stories are literal or symbolic, but for the Hopi the question is less important than the truth carried forward. The ant people are part of who they are, part of the reason they endure. The Sipapu in the Kiva holds this truth as well. Every time it is seen, it recalls the passage once taken from underground safety into a new world above. It is not merely a symbol, but a living link, a doorway of remembrance that connects generations. To stand before it is to remember that life has been preserved before and can be preserved again. The ant people's story is one of humility, showing that salvation comes not from force but from cooperation, not from pride but from gratitude. Their memory endures because it teaches what the Hopi believe is the deepest truth, that the earth itself holds allies, quiet and unseen, ready to guide humanity when balance falters and a new beginning must be made. In Hopi tradition, the ant people are not distant figures of a forgotten age, but companions carried forward in memory and practice. Their story is told during ceremonies, echoed in songs, and etched into the cliffs in spirals and star patterns. To the Hopi, these reminders are not decorative. They are sacred records of a time when life itself depended on unseen helpers below the earth. The ant people are remembered as beings who gave freely, who shared food and water during catastrophe, and who offered wisdom instead of dominance. Their example showed that strength is measured not by control but by service, not by taking but by giving. For the Hopi, this understanding became the heart of survival in the desert. Farming in such an arid land requires patience, humility, and constant cooperation. Corn, beans, and squash are planted in ways that mirror the lessons once taught underground. Each plant supports the others, just as each member of a community supports the whole. The Hopi see this not as chance, but as continuation, the living reflection of what was learned in the stillness of the ant people's chambers. Some accounts say that the ant people also passed down knowledge of cycles, not only of seasons, but of worlds. Fire, ice, and flood had ended the first 3 ages, and the Hopi were told that humanity now lives in the 4th world. But this too will end one day, and how it ends will depend on whether balance is preserved. The ant people remain symbols of this truth, that renewal is always possible, but only through humility and respect. The Sipapu in every Kiva is the constant reminder. Small and unassuming, it represents the vast passage once taken from safety below to life above. To outsiders it may look like only a hole in the floor, but for the Hopi it is a sacred doorway, proof that survival is possible even when the world seems to collapse. Rock carvings of thin figures with luminous heads continue this testimony, linking the ant people not only to the earth but to the stars. They are remembered as watchers of both realms, beings who could sense disaster before it struck. Whether literal or symbolic, this memory ensures that the Hopi live with awareness, trusting the signs of nature and honouring the cycles that govern life. To speak of the ant people today is to affirm that help has come before and may come again. They are not gone, only hidden, like seeds waiting in the earth for the season of renewal. The Hopi believe that stories are not just memories but guides, paths laid down for those who will face challenges still to come. Among their most treasured guides are the teachings of the ant people. These beings, who opened their underground homes in times of fire, ice, and flood, gave more than shelter. They gave lessons that shaped how the Hopi live in the 4th world. Their message was simple yet profound. Life is sustained not by conquest or pride, but by cooperation, patience, and respect for the cycles of the earth. Every field planted with corn, every prayer spoken for rain, every dance performed in the Kiva carries this memory. The ant people's generosity is alive in these acts, reminding the Hopi that survival is never the achievement of one alone but of many, working together in harmony. The Sipapu at the centre of ceremonies embodies this truth. It is a small opening, but it represents the vast journey from darkness into light, from the destruction of one world into the renewal of another. To stand before it is to remember that even when everything seems lost, renewal is possible. The Ant People's story assures that unseen allies exist, quiet yet enduring, ready to return when balance falters again. Some say they still watch from beneath the mesas, listening for the moment when their guidance will be needed once more. Others see them as present in spirit, their wisdom carried in the patience of the earth and the rhythm of the stars. Whether literal or symbolic, their influence is undeniable, shaping not only Hopi identity but their vision of the world. Rock carvings etched long ago show spirals of worlds turning, figures with luminous heads and patterns of stars. These images remain as a testimony that the story was not invented but lived. The Hopi carry this testimony forward with quiet strength, trusting that the wisdom of the Ant People endures in memory, in ceremony, and in the daily rhythm of life. For listeners today, the tale is both comfort and warning. Comfort because it shows that help has always come when most needed. Warning because it reminds humanity that imbalance brings destruction, and only humility ensures renewal. The Ant People stand as symbols of endurance and compassion, guardians of the passage between worlds. To close the story is not to end it, for in the Hopi view, cycles always continue. The Ant People remain, unseen but present, their legacy alive in every seed planted, every prayer offered, and every reminder that life, even in its darkest hour, can begin again.